taken out the Iranian missiles and drones, but this crisis is far from over. We filmed the interception above Jerusalem on Saturday as sirens wailed. And there's pressure from some members of the Israeli government to respond aggressively to show this unprecedented attack has serious consequences. This was the damage at the Nevatim air base in southern Israel. The IDF says it remains on high alert.
This base is still operational around the clock. The IDF is altogether still ready to protect the state of Israel. We are preparing and following any developments.
The country's war cabinet has met again for the third time in 48 hours. Several retaliatory options were reportedly discussed. But Iran says after its operation for the consulate airstrike, the matter is concluded. They are warning if Israel does attack, they will hit back.
The
Islamic Republic of Iran is not seeking to escalate tensions in the region. The Islamic Republic of Iran at every stage will act more strongly to create deterrence and punish aggressors for any illegal or illogical action.
Israel then faces a dilemma. Its security policy is founded on showing strength, do nothing, and the danger is looking weak in a region where hard power often wins the day. Whilst it's still not clear what will be Israel's response, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is under pressure from allies to show restraint. The danger is of a cycle of retaliation that escalates into a full-blown regional war. The country's military, though, says it is keeping all options on the table, and that includes both defensive and offensive actions. In the House of Commons, Rishi Sunak emphasised the need to step back from the brink.
We are working urgently with our allies to de-escalate the situation and prevent further bloodshed. We want to see calmer heads prevail, and we are directing all our diplomatic efforts to that end.
For Israelis, this is an anxious time. Since Saturday, more people have been coming forward to donate blood. There is a sense of national emergency and a need to do something.
Saturday night was something very, very new because there was a certain sense of vulnerability for a few hours until our faith in our army paid off and the Air Force. But yeah, these are difficult times.
As Israel grapples with how to respond to Iran, it is still fighting on two other fronts. This is a dangerous moment for the entire Middle East. And at present, there is no clear way out of this crisis. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Jerusalem.
Well, as Alex was saying there in his piece, Israel's allies are calling for restraint. So what are the military options and the possible consequences of any further strikes? Well, let's bring in our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, who has been covering this really right from the very beginning of October 7 and now monitoring events over the weekend. This is a dangerous moment, and Israel's war cabinet says all options are on the table.
Yeah, it's a dangerous moment, and going right back to October the 7th, the weeks after that, the big fear was of the attack there and the kibbutzes outside Gaza and the Israeli retaliation leading to a much bigger regional conflict. That fear subsided, but it's come back again, obviously, with a vengeance, and all eyes are on Israel. So we're watching very closely to see what Israeli government ministers and commanders are saying. The Israeli War Cabinet has met a number of times. We're not hearing from the government, we're hearing from unnamed sources, but we have heard from Herzi Halevi, who is the Israeli Chief of Staff of the IDF, talking at Nevatim Air Base. It was one of the few targets that Iran was able to hit, and all he said is Israel will respond. What we're hearing from other sources is that response will not be imminent, that Israel will not act alone, and what they're going to aim to do is try and hurt Iran somehow, whenever they choose to do so, but not in such a way that tips the region into a much bigger conflict. Easier said than done.
And we have been seeing the pressure from the international community, the United States, Britain, saying to Israel, look, be careful how you retaliate, because exactly what you've said, we don't want to tip the region into all-out war.
Yeah, so we have allies saying that, and the big fear is of Israel overreacting, overreaching, and precipitating a much bigger retaliation from the Iranians. We've made it pretty clear to our correspondent in Washington, James Matthews, I think we're going to hear from later. When he talked to the Iranian ambassador, he said that will be a decisive response, and Iran's made that very clear. If Israel hits Iran in such a way that it feels it needs to respond, you're going to see an escalation of retaliation. So Israel has a number of options. I mean, it could strike targets within Iran itself, but that, I think, is going to prompt a reaction from the Iranians, which would escalate things. It could therefore, in the sort of Goldilocks option, try and do something that's not too hot but not too cold. So it punishes Iran, but it doesn't lead to all-out escalation. So it could strike IRGC targets in Iraq, Syria or Lebanon, or it could assassinate a high-level Iranian nuclear scientist. It's done that a number of times in Iran, or another high-level Iranian Revolutionary Guards commander. And it could choose to do that at a sort of time of its own choosing in the weeks to come. The impression, I think the suspicion is there's nothing imminent planned immediately, that this is going to be something that they're going to bide their time over, keep their powder dry, keep the enemy guessing, and then something will happen that they will say was in retaliation for that attack. Having said that, there's enormous pressure from, particularly on the right of Israeli politics, from people like Naftali Bennett, former Israeli Prime Minister, who's saying, you've got to deter the Iranians, particularly the fact that they sent these ballistic missiles. The drones you can see coming, they take hours to reach here. They were all shot down. Not a single UAV got into Israeli airspace. Ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, are much more dangerous. They can be fired and they're much harder to anticipate because they move much quicker. And I think that's the big fear, is that they use so many of those. And so on the right, they are saying that Iran must be punished for that, and therefore we have to see much more decisive action. The debate's clearly going on, and I think the outcome of that debate is obviously going to frame what happens in the region for the days to come, and we'll have to see whether it leads to a much bigger escalation or whether Israel can make its point without plunging the region into all-out war.
Yeah, I mean, Dom, you know, there's been some who have said, look, this was for theatrics. Iran did this, but they didn't want to create any kind of damage. But when you think about it, 300 drones, missiles, cruise missiles, you know, ballistic missiles. The United States tonight has also made it clear that they didn't want to fail, that this level of attack, on some level, they wanted to see what damage they could actually do.
Yeah, John Kirby, the White House spokesman, pushed back against this narrative that's been forming, which is that it was kind of choreographed. There was a kind of script that both sides kind of agreed, that the Iranians got hit very badly in Damascus. Their consulate building was destroyed by the Israelis, and therefore they had to retaliate, and that possibly through diplomatic channels, they said to Israel, we're going to hit back, and they said to the Western allies of Israel, we're going to do it in a way that you'll be able to anticipate and shoot down. So it was designed to fail. Now, John Kirby pushed back against that and said it was nonsense. But I think there is a suspicion that Iran did not want any of these cruise missiles to do such damage that Israel would have to retaliate, because Iran does not want to see a much bigger war. It's not a war it could possibly win, and it's weak at home politically and economically. I'm not sure entirely what the truth is behind that, but I think it's still fair to say the Iranians don't want to see an all-out war, and therefore if the Israelis can calibrate this in such a way that it punishes them, that it makes the Israeli point, but it doesn't provoke a much bigger retaliation, then I think a much wider crisis could be averted still.
Dom, thank you so much. And of course, we will be talking to you a little later in the programme. And as Dominic Waghorn was just saying there, we did hear from the Iranians here on Sky News. As we've said, there was widespread condemnation of Iran's actions at a meeting of the UN Security Council overnight. Our US correspondent James Matthews was there, and he managed to speak exclusively to Iran's ambassador to the UN. Let's just have a listen to that exchange.
Have you risked escalation towards a wider war?
No, not at all. No, it was our legitimate right to respond, because they started aggression against our diplomatic premises.
More than 300 projectiles towards Israel. Is that reckless? And does that not direct the conflict towards a wider conflict, a wider theatre of war?
No, they claim that the majority of the drones and missiles has been intercepted by the Israeli and the allies, United States. So you should concentrate on the number of drones has been targeted inside the occupied territory.
The fact that they were intercepted, does that indicate a military weakness on the part of Iran?
No. No, it is the strength of the United States military capabilities. It is not the capability of Israel.
Yeah. The United States says that. The United States says that. So we'll catch you through that. So. You have been. Sorry. Yeah. You have been condemned in this chamber for a reckless act that risks escalation. The Americans in particular are saying that you should be held to account by the UN Security Council.
No. We say we condemn them that for the inaction on the first aggression of the Israeli against our diplomatic premises. If they did their job on that time, maybe it was no needed for our retaliation.
Israel says there will be a significant reaction, a significant response. What do you say to that?
No.
They say there will be a significant response, Israel. What do you say?
I think that it is a threat only by tongue, not in action.
An empty threat.
They know that. They know that what will be our second retaliation. So they understand. The next one will be most decisive.
We're just hearing there from the Iranian ambassador to the United Nations, speaking exclusively to our James Matthews there outside of the UN. Well, let's bring in Major General Giora Island, a former head of Israel's National Security Council. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us here on the program. I just want to get your reaction to what the Iranian ambassador to the UN was telling my colleague there just earlier today, where he said what Israel is saying they will respond, they have to respond. These are just empty threats. Your response to that?
No, I don't think that these are empty threats. However, I'm not sure that Israel will retaliate. I'm not sure that it is going to occur soon. And I'm not sure that even if there is an Israel retaliation, then it will be directed against the territory of Iran. So we have to understand the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that Iran managed to build around Israel something that they call the ring of fire, with so many militias and powers that actually are built only for one reason, and this is to be able to attack Israel simultaneously with the full support from Iran, and hopefully to bring to a complete collapse of the state of Israel. This is the intent. So in order to prevent it, one of the things that we do in the past 9 years is to prevent Iran from establishing in Syria a similar organization like Hezbollah in Lebanon. And the last attack that we conducted in Damascus was part of this Israeli strategy. By the way, the target was not consulate and it was not diplomatic asset. It was purely building of the revolutionary
Israel
guard.
says that. Israel says that, but it is widely believed that it was a diplomatic compound. Journalists who have operated in that area say this area was a diplomatic compound, and that's why Iran says it launched this attack. But Major General, are you saying that you believe what Iran did over the weekend was just theatrics, despite those 300 drones and ballistic and cruise missiles?
No, what I'm saying, just in order again to correct what you said, this building, only 7 people were killed. All of them are people of the Revolutionary Guard, that their job is to establish a second Hezbollah in Syria, to transfer weapons to Hezbollah, and to smuggle weapons to the West Bank. That's what they do, and it was purely military target. It is important. However, let's proceed. What the Iranian did was something that is unprecedented, but fortunately we managed to intercept it, and now the options are in the hands of Israel. And personally, if you ask me, I don't think that we should retaliate against Iran itself, because just as your correspondent said, it will probably trigger a cycle of violence. And I'm not sure that Israel, that now have some other fronts, whether it is Gaza and Lebanon, should be interested in such an escalation. More than that, we are urged.
I just want to ask you further about that, because you say you don't believe that should happen. The War Cabinet has met several times in the last 24 hours, and within the War Cabinet, what we're hearing is that there is a split. There are those who want to see a very forceful response. Is that what you're hearing?
I'm hearing, I would say, conflicting messages, and I do know that there was, let's say, controversial discussions about that, which is understandable because I can justify even a decision to retaliate against Iran for obvious reasons. But again, I don't think that this is a smart thing. And the main reason why I don't think that we should retaliate right now is because the main threat that Iran create is the potential of nuclear weapons in the hands of Iran. That's something that can occur in a year or two. And we should take advantage of our ability now to defend ourselves, but more important, to create such an international coalition against Iran and to try to persuade our allies that this is probably the time to, let's say, to resume the pressure, the political, the economic one, maybe even some military threats against Iran in order to stop this very dangerous development of nuclear weapons. And if we begin now some kind of an exchange of fire with Iran, it doesn't necessarily will serve the much more important goal, and this is to prevent these nuclear weapons from the hands of Iran.
Yeah, Major General, so are you saying that this should just go back to the shadow wars that we've seen over the last few years between the two states?
No, what I'm saying is that it is not that we should be deterred by the Iranian and what they did, because one of the things that we should continue to do is to try to attack Iranian targets or pro-Iranian militias and organizations in Syria, something that we did dozens of times in the past 9 years, and we should continue and proceed. And I would guess that the Iranian would not retaliate if we do it. And if we continue to do it, at least we serve directly one of the more important interests of the state of Israel, and this is to prevent from the militia in Syria to become as strong and effective as Hezbollah. And at the very same time, our next mission should be to try to find a solution to the conflict with Hezbollah along our northern border. And I think that, again, the coalition that was established in the past few days could be used in order to prevent, let's say, another war in Lebanon by persuading the Lebanese to agree to reasonable arrangements along the Israeli-Lebanese border. And these two matters, Syria and Lebanon, as far as I'm concerned, are more specific, let's say, interests of the state of Israel, rather than to show that we are not afraid and we retaliate just for the sake of retaliation.
Major General Giora Island, thank you very much for joining us here on the program.
You're welcome.
Well, we heard there from the Major General talking about the tensions there with Hezbollah in Lebanon. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come, the latest from Lebanon, where 4 Israeli soldiers have been injured in a border clash with Hezbollah.
Evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over. Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
We help you understand the world with us. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. I've reported from around the world and around the UK. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who've made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Joe Biden knows the celebrations are over, and this is a country in crisis.
You don't want to be remembered this way. You always want to be remembered as something positive.
It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground. How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again? I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Welcome back to this special edition of The World. With me, Yalda Hakim, live from Jerusalem. Senior political leaders are deciding how Israel will respond after the weekend attack by Iran. Washington has urged restraint, with President Biden telling his Israeli counterpart that he should take the win. But there was no further violence today inside Lebanon. Well, our special correspondent Alex Crawford is in the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Alex, really good to see you. We've been talking a lot about the attacks by Iran against Israel, but of course we've also seen some skirmishes and 4 Israeli soldiers attacked on the Lebanese border. Just give us an update on that.
Well, this is interesting, Yalda, because this is the first time it's been publicly acknowledged by both Hezbollah, the Lebanese militant group, and the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, that Israeli soldiers have made their way inside their neighbouring sovereign country, the country of Lebanon. The 4 Israeli soldiers were apparently on some sort of military manoeuvres. They made their way through several hundred metres inside Lebanon. They, according to Hezbollah, were spotted and they waited until these soldiers reached buried explosive devices. And when they reached them, Hezbollah claimed that they then detonated them. 4 of them were injured, 1 of them apparently seriously. What we don't know is why the IDF, why the Israeli soldiers were inside Lebanon. Were they the only 4 that were inside Lebanon? What was their mission? What were they doing there? And have they been doing this all along, the last 6 months or so? Certainly the indications are that this is probably not the first time that Israeli soldiers have made their way inside Lebanon. As you know, there have been almost daily exchanges of fire, sometimes more than once a day, between Lebanon and Israel across the border. Israeli drones have definitely breached Lebanese airspace on a regular basis, including Israeli jets flying over Lebanon. We understand from Lebanese security forces that only last week a Lebanese man, a Hezbollah supporter, a man who was under US sanctions list for funneling money to Hamas, was found shot dead with a pile of money on him in the mountains in Lebanon. It was put down to a hit job by the Israeli intelligence service Mossad. So certainly the Lebanese authorities believe that there have been previous breaches of their sovereign state inside Lebanon, but this is the first acknowledgement by both sides.
Yeah, and as you say, Alex, I mean, frankly, for the last 6 months, there has been low-level war between Israel and Hezbollah, something that the Israeli authorities have continued to express angst about and frustration with the United States, saying we need this issue resolved.
There have been a lot of exchanges of fire between Lebanon, Hezbollah positions on the border and Israeli positions in Israel. There's been a serious displacement on both sides, with something like 90,000 Lebanese who've had to move out of their areas, their towns and villages on the border, 60,000 or so on the Israeli side. Obviously, a great deal of fear and terror amongst the communities on both sides, with these almost daily incursions, which appear to be getting deeper inside each other's territory and becoming stronger and more serious. And the fear is that this will escalate into a much more serious repercussions between both sides. And when the question is being asked is, how is Israel going to retaliate? Are they going to hit Iran, or are they going to hit their particular proxies? Well, Hezbollah is their strongest and their main proxy in Lebanon, and they would be one of the most serious targets, it would seem, from Israel if they were to take retaliatory action.
Alex, thank you as always for all of your coverage. Alex Crawford, our special correspondent, live there from Beirut. Now, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard has said the missile and drone strikes at the weekend were a response to an attack on its embassy in Damascus 2 weeks ago. 2 generals and 7 members of the IRGC were killed in the strike, which Tehran blamed on Israel. The concern now is what further action Iran might take and how they can be persuaded to de-escalate this conflict. Well, we're joined now from Washington by the exiled Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us here on the programme. First of all, your reaction to the events of the weekend where we saw 300 drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles barrage launched on Israel?
Well, first and foremost, let's understand that this regime is becoming weaker and weaker and desperate by the minute. Interestingly enough, at the same time they launch this attack against Israel, they also launched an attack on Iranian women at home. Repression at home and aggression abroad has been part and parcels of the basic strategy of this regime that is trying to export an ideology from day one. And this is why we have come to this point. There was also a matter of domestic consumption and a lot of propaganda trying to satisfy their base, but to the detriment of a nation that are the first victim of this regime. If you look at it from this perspective, Israelis, Iranians, Palestinians, Lebanese, Syrians, Iraqis, everybody is ultimately impacted by what this regime is trying to do. We have to look beyond just
the regime have certainly tried to... The regime has certainly tried to sell it back to the Iranian people as some kind of success. In fact, we spoke to the Iranian ambassador to the UN today, and he said, as far as we're concerned, this operation was successful.
Well, the way majority of my compatriots look at it is billions of dollars wasted on weaponries that proved to be ineffective at the end of the day, while Iranians are queuing for food and fuel, worrying about what could happen next under an extremely bad economic situation. Our country is not going to benefit from this regime that doesn't spend a dime on the needs of our society. Instead, it finances its proxies in the region in order to maintain itself in power. This is the bottom line take that Iranians have of the situation. And as you well know, and I think a lot of the leaders in the region, including the Israelis, know very well that Iranians do not at all stand with what this regime stands for. What they call for is the exact opposite of what this regime is.
What do you think, Mr. Pahlavi, will happen next? Because, of course, Israel is having discussions. They're having very serious debates here about what to do next. They are split, but the feeling is there needs to be some kind of response. What do you think Iran will do next?
Look, I mean, I'm not going to get into speculating as to who is going to do what and whether this will escalate or not. What I can tell you, however, is that the ultimate solution that puts an end to all the problems that are directly tied to this regime, whether it's the nuclear threat or radicalism or terrorism or lack of stability in the region, is for this regime to be put to an end. The Iranian people have launched for a long time a fight for freedom. I think this is the time where the world can make an ultimate decision with a major shift in policy that rather than pursuing avenues of diplomacy and appeasement that only embolden this regime to do exactly what we have seen lately, is to put an end to it by supporting for change the Iranian people who are the alternative.
Yeah, I mean, you've formed some sort of, opposition, a coalition. But do you feel as though anyone is listening or willing to support it?
Well, that's exactly what I think now the world, especially after what has happened recently, have to begin thoroughly as to how long can we pursue the status quo and hoping for a different outcome, as opposed to this regime has been given plenty of opportunities to come into fold, and it hasn't. And the reason is very simple, because the survival of this regime depends on maintaining the same repression they have for decades now inside Iran, but also to have a campaign of exportation of an ideology. As long as this regime continues to exist, we will not see an end to it. This is why the Iranian people, who are the most natural ally to the free world, need to be supported.
As you know, I mean, the only way for regime change is from within, when there is weakness from within the regime. But is that the case? I mean, does it appear to be any cracks?
Of course. Of course. I mean, look, millions of Iranians, despite that level of terror and repression against them, have bravely shown their courage by standing up to this regime for weeks and months at a time. There's been ebbs and flows, of course, but they're still persisting and resilient to do anything they can. The question that is lacking right now is, where is the support from the outside world? Why is the world still engaged in trying to expect a change of behavior by the regime rather than to invest on the alternative to this regime, which is the Iranian people, towards a secular democratic alternative in the future of a country, as opposed to a religious dictatorship that is ideologically the worst enemy of stability and peace. Their objective and their whole triumph is talk about martyrdom and getting their reward in the afterworld. We're talking about the current situation of bringing peace and stability in the region and partnership with our neighbors, the total opposite of this regime. I think the time has come for the world to make a final decision on the subject, and this is where we need to have a two-pronged approach. Increasing the pressure on the regime by means of further sanctions, but also having a policy of maximum support for the Iranian people. This is something that we need to discuss seriously now with world leaders and government decision makers.
Reza Pahlavi, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Well, stay with me as a key question coming up. Will the US help Israel again if Iran strikes for a second time? I'll ask the deputy spokesperson at the Pentagon in the next few minutes. Stay with us. Plus, why Donald Trump's race for the White House has gotten even more complicated. We'll have the latest on a historic criminal trial underway in New York. Welcome back. The United States has accused Iran of violating the sovereignty of several Middle Eastern countries. So far, the Pentagon has been tight-lipped about whether U.S. military assets will be used to help Israel again. Well, we can speak now to the Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary, Sabrina Singh. Sabrina, thanks so much for joining us here on the program. Do you expect Israel to respond? They're having very serious debates and discussions here. They have done so over the last 24 hours.
Well, thanks for having me today. Look, that's really a decision that the war cabinet, that the Israeli government is going to have to decide if they choose to respond. But what I can tell you is, and what we did over the weekend, is partner with the IDF and partner nations in the region to shoot down over 300 types of different munitions headed towards Israel. And our efforts led to an incredibly successful evening. We shot down nearly 99% of what was launched towards Israel. So we view that evening as a success. But again, that's really up to Israel to decide if they choose to respond. And it's really at a time and place of their choosing.
Yeah, you view that as a success, but there are many here in Israel who believe that, you know, if it hadn't been for their defenses, if it hadn't been for the allies, namely, obviously, the United States and Britain and also Jordan, that this could have been far more serious and had greater implications and caused greater damage. So they feel, in many ways, they need to respond. You're saying it should be at a time of their choosing and you know, up to them, but it is going to create a great deal of danger in this region.
Well, look, that's exactly why we've been urging since October 7th we've been urging de-escalation. We don't want to see tensions continue to rise in the region. We know they are high right now, and that's why we continue to emphasize to de-escalate. And we're doing that both publicly and privately in our channels. The president, the secretary.
Does it appear to you, though, that is Israel listening?
You know, we're having direct and frank conversations with Israel. Again, it is up to Israel to make their own decisions about how and if they choose to respond. But we, as the United States do, we will always stand in support of Israel in their self-defense. The president made a commitment to that. Our commitment to Israel remains ironclad. That's why you saw our fighters in the air over the sky on Saturday, our destroyers in the Eastern Med, engaging multiple ballistic missiles and drones that were shot towards Israel. That's why we were there.
So if Israel were to, and so if Israel were to respond, would the United States stand with Israel?
Again, I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals. It is Israel's decision to decide if they choose to respond. What we are doing in Israel, what we are doing there, is to support Israel in their self-defense. And those attacks that you saw from Iran, from other
it's not quite, you know,
that's why we're there.
It's not quite a hypothetical. These are options that are on the table. President Biden has said, you know, urge restraint, and said, we're also hearing, though, from within that should Israel decide to respond, the United States has said that they won't necessarily be there to assist. Can you confirm that?
Yeah, I'm just not going to get into private diplomatic conversations that we're having. What I can tell you, and I know I don't mean to sound like a broken record here, but what I can tell you is that on Saturday, what you saw us do was in the support of the self-defense of Israel. We are in the region to help Israel if it is attacked again by Iran. You know, we are there in Israel's self-defense. We are also there to help support humanitarian efforts in Gaza. You know that we're dropping humanitarian aid in almost every day. We're working to get a floating pier up so we can get trucks moving into Gaza to really get aid in to the Palestinians that need it most. That's our priority right now.
Well, we're also hearing that the Defense Secretary here in Israel has told Lloyd Austin that they have no choice but to respond to this attack. What was the response from Lloyd Austin?
Look, the Secretary has engaged with Minister Gallant probably 50 times since October 7th. They have almost weekly conversations with each other. Over the weekend, they spoke 3 times. Those conversations are direct. They're frank. The Secretary is very honest about our assessment of how things went over the weekend, the success of our air defenses knitted together. I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm not going to go into further detail on their private conversations.
When you say direct and frank, though, you know, is the United States laying out the risk that this region faces if Israel does choose to respond?
We have been very clear that the United States does not seek a war with Iran, and we do not want to see a regional conflict widen beyond what's happening within Israel. So again, we've been very clear both publicly and privately that we do not seek war. We do not want to see a regional war. We want tensions to de-escalate. And we believe that, look, our response was incredibly powerful. It sent a strong message of Israel's capability, Israel's military capability, our own military capability on Saturday. And it really showed that Iran is not the military power that it tries to project to the world.
Just very briefly, Sabrina, should Israel decide to respond, does the United States expect a heads up? Because in the past, I mean, even the April 1st attack, the United States didn't get much of a heads up from Israel that they were going to do it.
Yeah, we've been engaging on a very daily basis since Friday with Minister Gallant, not just here in this department, but across the interagency from all the way at the president's level. Again, I'm not going to detail those conversations, but what I can tell you is that we are in very close touch with our Israeli counterparts, and we remain and will continue to be in close contact throughout the week.
Okay, Sabrina Singh, Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary, thank you so much for joining us. Now, we'll come back to that decision being discussed by the Israeli government later in the program. Let's stay in the United States, though, because Donald Trump's become the first ever former U.S. president to face a criminal trial. He's accused of trying to cover up paying hush money to adult film actress Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 presidential election. Well, let's go straight to our U.S. correspondent, James Matthews, who's been following the proceedings. And James, I understand Donald Trump has just spoken.
That's right, Yalda. Yeah, he exited from court a few minutes ago when the judge adjourned for the day. No juror yet selected. Let's listen to Donald Trump, his sentiments, his thoughts on exit from courtroom number 1530 inside this New York court building.
Mr. Trump, will you be happy today? You're the staff last of the trial.
So thank you very much. We had some amazing things happen today. As you know, my son is graduating from high school, and it looks like the judge will not let me go through the graduation of my son, who's worked very, very hard. He's a great student. He's very proud of the fact that he did so well, and was looking forward for years to have graduation with his mother and father there. And it looks like the judge isn't going to allow me to escape this scam. It's a scam trial. If you read all of the legal pundits, all of the legal scholars today, there's not one that I see that said this is a case that should be brought or tried. It's a scam. It's a political witch hunt. It continues, and it continues forever. And we're not going to be given a fair trial. It's a very, very sad thing. In addition, as you know, next Thursday, we're before the United States Supreme Court on a very big hearing on immunity. And this is something that we've been waiting for a long time. And the judge, of course, is not going to allow us. He's a very conflicted judge. And he's not going to allow us to go to that. He won't allow me to leave here for a half a day, go to D.C. and go before the United States Supreme Court because he thinks he's superior, I guess, to the Supreme Court. We got a real problem with this judge. We have a real problem with a lot of things having to do with this trial, including the DA, because you go right outside and people are being mugged and killed all day long, and he's sitting here all day with about 10 or 12 prosecutors over nothing. Over nothing.
There you go, Donald Trump calling this a sad day, a scam trial, a political witch hunt. One thing is for sure, it's extremely significant for him and for this country, bearing in mind he's running for president. Let's have a look at what's going on here inside this New York court building, a look at the day's events.
In Midtown Manhattan, he stepped out and stepped in to the history books. The long arm of the law beckoned Donald Trump downtown. For a first former president to be criminally prosecuted, this was the first day of his trial. The people of the state of New York versus Donald J. Trump, even if he called it by another name.
This is political persecution. This is a persecution like never before. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And again, it's a case that should have never been brought. It's an assault on America.
The first time in history, lawyers for Trump.
Donald Trump chegou aqui.
The crowds for and against were out for this, one of 4 trials that Donald Trump faces.
I think it's all a hoax, and they're not going to get Donald Trump.
It might be the only trial before the November election.
We are one step closer to holding him accountable.
This is the so-called hush money case relating to former porn star Stormy Daniels. She claimed that she had an affair with Trump. He's accused of paying her to keep the story quiet before the 2016 election. The alleged crime is that he put the payment through the company books as something else. In the building where New York prosecutes its criminals, a court on the 15th floor began picking jurors who'll decide the fate of the former president. These are pictures from inside court. When Trump was introduced to potential jurors as the defendant, he was seen to deliver what was described as a tight-lipped smirk. If a 12-member jury ultimately convicts Donald Trump, it won't necessarily lead to his imprisonment.
It is highly unlikely, because it's not a violent crime, that he will get sentenced to jail. I can see if he's convicted that he would be sentenced to probation or even community service. You can see Donald Trump cleaning up the streets as part of a sentence, or he can be sentenced to jail, but I think that's highly unlikely.
While the circus ensued outside court, inside the wheels of justice began to roll. Donald Trump's defense team asked that the judge step down, withdraw from the case. The judge, Juan Merchan, denied that and delayed a ruling on a separate request that he be given a day off from court on the 17th of May to attend his son's high school graduation. It was the procedural start of a court case that will decide one man's guilt or innocence, and so much more.
So, James, I mean, more trouble for Donald Trump in his race for the White House, really.
Indeed. This is extremely serious for him. He could emerge from this court case a convicted felon, Yalda. I'm joined by Bernarda Villalona. You saw her in my report there. Bernarda, let me ask you first of all, we saw Donald Trump disrespecting the court process. You're a former New York prosecutor. How does that play in the minds, do you think, of a jury and of a judge?
Yeah, so you have to think that people are looking at his interviews. People are reading his interviews. People are reading his social media posts. And just remember, a jury hasn't been selected today. And so any juror that's coming in tomorrow is going to be like, wait, I just heard what he said yesterday. And because of what he said, I can't be a fair and impartial juror. And that's if they decide to self-report. What if they don't and decide to just keep it to themselves and they end up on the jury and it works against Donald Trump? That's why he has to be mindful of what he says in the jury and in front of the media. Because you have to think, yes, you are running for office. Yes, you are campaigning. But here in this criminal courthouse, we are talking about your liberty. We are talking about you possibly spending time in jail. And this is what's more important.
Yeah, we heard you in my report saying that you didn't think it would come to jail should he be convicted. You're a former prosecutor. What do you think of the strength of this case? There are witnesses, his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, he's been convicted in a courtroom of lying. How strong is the case against Trump?
Well, the prosecution does have a strong case. Is it a case that people are so enticed in because it's a paper case, it doesn't involve violence? Yeah, people are going to be like, I don't really like the case. It's not that serious. However, when you look at the charges, falsifying business records, for him to have the intent to falsify business records with the intent to commit or conceal a crime, it is there. And Michael Cohen, yes, he has been convicted of a crime. That does not mean that he is not believable. A judge is just a couple blocks away from here, in his opinion, in the New York Attorney General case against him, wrote that just because he's been convicted of crime does not mean that he's not believable. The prosecution is going to corroborate his testimony. Other witnesses are going to corroborate his testimony. And guess what he also has in the prosecution act? They have documents, and the documents do not lie. And the prosecution is going to be able to tie all of that up at the end.
Great. Bernarda, many thanks for joining us. We'll hear much more from you throughout the course of this trial. Expected, Yalda, to last something like a month to 6 weeks.
Thank you so much for all of that, James. Now in Jerusalem, it's been a day of political maneuvering as world leaders work out their next moves following Iran's drone and missile attacks on Israel. Here, the war cabinet met and Israel's military chief of staff promised the attack would be met with a response. Well, let's discuss this further with our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn. And Dom, I mean, lots of discussions on the programme today. We heard from Giora Island as well, the Major General who is urging Israel to just think before it acts. And frankly, the United States is saying the same thing.
Yeah, very interesting programme, because I think, there's been a lot of sound and fury over the last 48 hours, a lot of froth, a lot of anger. Levels are running very high here, but we got to sort of deeper undercurrents, deeper issues. We heard from the Iranian Crown Prince talking about the feeling that he thinks is going on, the undercurrents of feelings there. But also Giora Island is a very respected general. What he had to say, I think, was very interesting. He's the kind of wiser head that David Cameron and Rishi Sunak wants to prevail, and he's urging those on the right, the more hot-headed end of Israeli politics, to bide their time, to play a longer game, particularly because of the worry about Iran developing nuclear weapons. And his big aim is to build on the kind of coalition that was shown off on Saturday to such effect. This is what he had to say.
The main reason why I don't think that we should retaliate right now is because the main threat that Iran create is the potential of nuclear weapons in the hands of Iran. That's something that can occur in a year or two. And we should take advantage of our ability now to defend ourselves, but more important, to create such an international coalition against Iran.
Listening there to Major General Giora Island as Israel decides and thinks about what to do next. We will be following all the developments here in Israel. The war cabinet has met at least 3 times in the last 24 hours to discuss and debate. They're having very serious debates in this country about what to do. And as you hear there from Giora Island, that people in the war cabinet need to have a more long-term plan and think more strategically. We'll be following everything here, but stay with us. We've got much more on the news at 10 with me here in Jerusalem and from the studio. Good night for now.